5 million people. That's how many Christians have left the traditional Bible Belt in the past 15 years. 5 million believers who grew up in Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas but now live in Colorado, Texas, Arizona, Oregon, and North Carolina cities. The Great Migration of the early 20th century saw 6 million African Americans leave the South for opportunities in the North and West. Now we're witnessing another exodus, quieter but just as significant. Bible Belt Christians, raised in small-town evangelical culture, abandoning the region that defined American Christianity for 2 centuries. They're not leaving faith. They're leaving a place where faith has become inseparable from politics they reject, culture they find suffocating, and churches they can no longer recognize. They're moving to cities, to mountain towns, to places where Christianity looks different and being Christian doesn't mean what it meant back home. This migration is reshaping American Christianity geographically, culturally, and politically. The Bible Belt that once dominated evangelical life is hollowing out. And the Christians leaving are building something new in the places they're going, something their parents and grandparents wouldn't recognize. Today, we're investigating the Bible Belt exodus. Who's leaving and why? Where they're going and what they're finding. How this migration is changing both the places they left and the places they're building new lives. And what this reveals about the future of evangelical Christianity in America. If you want to understand one of the most significant religious demographic shifts in modern American history, subscribe now. Because the Bible Belt exodus isn't just about geography. It's about a generation of Christians rejecting the faith culture they inherited and trying to build something better, even if they don't yet know what that is. To understand the scale of this migration, you need to see the data. Between 2010 and 2025, the core Bible Belt states of Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and South Carolina have experienced net population loss of Christians specifically, while their overall populations remained relatively stable or grew slightly. This means Christians are leaving at higher rates than the general population. The traditional Bible Belt extended from Virginia through the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and parts of Texas and Oklahoma. Across this region, rural counties and small towns are losing population while cities within the region are diversifying religiously. Meanwhile, specific destinations are absorbing Bible Belt Christians in massive numbers. The Nashville metropolitan area has gained over 300,000 new residents in the past decade, many from rural Tennessee and surrounding Bible Belt states. Raleigh-Durham has exploded with transplants from across the South. Atlanta continues to grow as the progressive southern city where Bible Belt Christians can stay in the region while escaping its cultural constraints. Outside the South, Denver and Colorado Springs have become magnets for Bible Belt evangelicals seeking mountain culture and more libertarian politics. Austin and Dallas-Fort Worth in Texas attract those wanting warmer climate with more cosmopolitan culture. Portland and Boise have smaller but significant populations of Bible Belt refugees seeking progressive politics and outdoor lifestyle. Phoenix and Nashville especially have become known as destinations where you can find Bible Belt culture transplanted with slight modifications, less overtly political, more diverse, but still recognizably evangelical. The migration patterns are clear. Christians are leaving rural Bible Belt areas for cities within and outside the region. They're moving from culturally homogeneous small towns to diverse urban environments. They're trading insularity for cosmopolitanism while trying to maintain faith commitments. And they're doing it in numbers large enough to reshape both the places they're leaving and the places they're going. The Christians leaving the Bible Belt fit a demographic pattern. They're younger, typically millennials and Gen Z rather than Gen X or boomers. They're educated, often with college degrees that took them away from home initially and exposed them to different perspectives. They're economically mobile, with skills and credentials that make relocation feasible. They're often politically moderate or progressive, at least relative to their home communities. And they're spiritually searching, still Christian but questioning the version of Christianity they inherited. Let me introduce you to some of them. Sarah grew up in a small town in Alabama, population 3,000. She was raised Southern Baptist, attended church 3 times a week, and never questioned her faith or her community until college. She went to Auburn, where for the first time she met Christians who were Democrats, who didn't think evolution contradicted the Bible, and who wrestled with Scripture instead of just accepting what pastors said. After graduation, she moved to Nashville for a marketing job. She still identifies as Christian but can't imagine returning to her hometown church where sermons feel more about Republican politics than Jesus and where asking questions about race or sexuality is treated as rebellion. Marcus grew up Pentecostal in rural Georgia. His church was his entire social world. He loved the emotional worship and the tight community. But as he got older, he started noticing things that bothered him. The pastor's inflammatory political rhetoric from the pulpit, the way the church shunned gay people, the refusal to acknowledge racism as a current problem. When he graduated high school, he joined the military, and exposure to people from different backgrounds changed him. After his service, he settled in Denver instead of returning home. He attends a non-denominational church that feels more diverse and less culturally rigid than the Pentecostal church he grew up in. He says he's still Pentecostal in theology but can't be Pentecostal in culture anymore. Emily grew up Southern Baptist in Mississippi. She was the model Christian kid, led youth group, went on mission trips, and planned to marry a pastor. Then in college she started reading more broadly, discovered progressive Christianity, and realized her church's teachings on women, sexuality, and politics didn't align with what she believed the gospel demanded. She moved to Portland after graduation specifically because she wanted to find a community where progressive politics and Christian faith could coexist. She says leaving Mississippi was necessary for her faith to survive because the Christianity she grew up with was suffocating her. These stories represent thousands. Young Bible Belt Christians who love Jesus but can't stay in the cultural environment where they were raised, who are trading the familiar for the uncertain because the cost of staying felt too high. Subscribe now if you're wondering what specifically drove them away, because we need to investigate the push factors behind the exodus. The primary reason Bible Belt Christians are leaving is political captivity. In the traditional Bible Belt, Christianity and Republican politics have become so intertwined that separating them is nearly impossible. Church and party are functionally indistinguishable. Pastors preach about elections more than the gospel. Church parking lots have political signs. Fellowship halls host Republican candidates. Prayer meetings focus on defeating Democrats. For older Bible Belt Christians, this feels natural and right. For younger ones, it's disqualifying. One former Bible Belt resident told me his church in Tennessee spent more time on the 2020 election than on Jesus' resurrection. Sermons were about socialism and critical race theory. Prayers were for Trump's victory. The church's entire identity seemed wrapped up in political outcomes. He said it felt less like a church and more like a Republican rally with worship music. When he tried to raise concerns, he was told he was being divisive and needed to submit to leadership. He left for Atlanta, where he found a church that addressed politics thoughtfully but didn't make partisan loyalty a condition of fellowship. The political captivity isn't just about Trump, though he accelerated the trend. It's about decades of fusion between evangelical identity and conservative politics. In the Bible Belt, being Christian means being Republican. Voting Democrat is considered possible evidence you're not really saved. Supporting progressive causes like racial justice or environmental stewardship gets you labeled a heretic or deceived. This equation of faith with partisan politics drives away Christians who don't fit the mold. Moderates who think both parties have good and bad ideas. Progressives who believe the gospel demands justice for the oppressed. And even conservatives who are uncomfortable with how thoroughly politics has consumed the church. The exodus to cities is partly an escape from this captivity. Cities within and outside the Bible Belt tend to have more diverse churches where people across the political spectrum worship together, where pastors preach scripture without making every sermon about politics, where your vote doesn't determine your spiritual status. For Bible Belt refugees, this feels like breathing fresh air after being suffocated. They can finally be Christian without being Republican, and for many, that freedom is worth leaving home. The second major push factor is racial injustice and the Bible Belt Church's refusal to address it. George Floyd's murder and the 2020 protests forced many white Bible Belt Christians to confront realities they'd been ignoring. Systemic racism, police brutality, the enduring effects of slavery and Jim Crow. When they looked to their churches for moral leadership on these issues, they found silence or defensiveness. Pastors who'd preached forcefully about abortion and sexuality said nothing about racial injustice. Churches that claimed to value life dismissed Black Lives Matter as Marxist without engaging the legitimate concerns about racial violence. White Bible Belt Christians who wanted their churches to speak prophetically about racism were told they were importing critical race theory or social justice heresies. They were accused of prioritizing politics over gospel, the same accusation they'd make about the church's Republican captivity. The hypocrisy was glaring. For many, the 2020 moment was a breaking point. One woman told me she'd grown up in a Southern Baptist church in South Carolina that was entirely white despite being in a 50% Black community. After George Floyd, she asked her pastor why the church had no Black members and whether they'd consider addressing racism. His response was that the church preached the gospel and race was a distraction from that. She realized he didn't see racism as a gospel issue, which meant his gospel was incomplete. She moved to Raleigh and found a multiracial church that took justice seriously. The racial dynamics intersect with generational change. Younger white evangelicals are more likely to acknowledge systemic racism and want churches that address it. Older white evangelicals often deny systemic racism exists or say churches shouldn't be involved in social issues. This generational divide makes Bible Belt churches uncomfortable for young people who can't pretend race doesn't matter. The exodus includes not just white Christians uncomfortable with their church's racial blindness, but also Black and Hispanic Christians who've left Bible Belt churches that claim to welcome diversity but never shared power or listened to non-white perspectives. They're finding churches in cities that are genuinely multiracial and multicultural, not just cosmetically diverse. The third push factor is cultural rigidity and the Bible Belt's inability to make space for questions, doubts, or differences. Bible Belt Christianity tends toward fundamentalism, not just in theology but in culture. There's one right way to be Christian, and deviation is dangerous. You dress certain ways. You listen to certain music. You avoid certain behaviors. You hold certain political views. You don't ask certain questions. This rigid culture works for people who naturally fit the mold. For everyone else, it's suffocating. Multiple people described feeling like they had to perform a version of Christianity that never quite fit. One man said he grew up in a Baptist church in Arkansas where every aspect of life was prescribed. Don't drink. Don't dance. Don't listen to secular music. Don't watch R-rated movies. Don't question the pastor. Don't vote Democrat. Don't be friends with gay people. He followed the rules through high school but felt increasingly like he was play-acting rather than genuinely living faith. In college, he met Christians who drank responsibly, engaged culture thoughtfully, and asked hard questions about theology. He realized faith could be less rigid and more grace-filled. After graduation, he moved to Austin specifically to find a church community less legalistic than what he'd known. The cultural rigidity extends to how Bible Belt churches handle doubt and questions. Asking why God allows suffering or how evolution fits with Genesis, or whether hell is eternal, these questions are often treated as dangerous rather than natural parts of faith development. Young people with intellectual curiosity feel punished for thinking rather than encouraged. They learn to hide doubts and fake certainty. Then they leave for places where doubt is acceptable and questions are welcomed. Cities tend to have churches that engage doubt more thoughtfully. Progressive and moderate congregations make space for theological diversity. This attracts Bible Belt refugees who are tired of pretending they have everything figured out. The fourth major push factor is how Bible Belt churches handle sexuality and gender, particularly regarding LGBTQ people. For older generations, the Bible Belt's traditional sexual ethics feel non-negotiable. But younger evangelicals are less certain. Many have LGBTQ friends or family members. They've seen how purity culture damaged people. They question whether the Bible clearly condemns all same-sex relationships. And they're uncomfortable with how harshly Bible Belt churches treat LGBTQ people. Even young Christians who hold traditional sexual ethics are often disturbed by the meanness and lack of compassion they see in their church's approach to sexuality. One woman told me her brother came out as gay during college. Her parents' church in Mississippi responded by telling the family their son was choosing sin and they needed to cut him off unless he repented. The church offered no pastoral care, no acknowledgement of the pain the family felt, just condemnation and ultimatums. She watched her brother become suicidal under the weight of rejection. She realized her church's theology might technically be orthodox, but its practice was cruel and Christ-denying. She moved to Seattle and found a church that took a more compassionate approach to sexuality questions, even while holding traditional views. She said the difference was grace. Her old church had doctrine without love. Her new church has both. The sexuality issue particularly affects young women who grew up with purity culture. The teachings that their bodies were stumbling blocks for men, that their value depended on virginity, that they were responsible for men's lust. These teachings created shame, dysfunction, and trauma. Women who experienced purity culture's damage can't stay in churches that still teach it. They're finding churches in cities that offer healthier sexual ethics, that honor women's dignity, and that don't reduce them to sexual objects men must avoid. The exodus includes both LGBTQ Christians seeking affirming communities and straight Christians who can't participate in churches that treat LGBTQ people cruelly. Ironically, while Bible Belt churches pride themselves on community, that community often becomes a reason people leave. Bible Belt church community is intense and tightly knit, which is wonderful if you fit. But if you don't fit theologically, politically, or culturally, the community becomes oppressive. Everyone knows your business. Everyone has opinions about your choices. Everyone expects conformity. The price of belonging is performance. You must maintain the right image, hold the right views, and live the right way. When people can't or won't perform, the community turns on them. Multiple people described being shunned by their church communities for relatively minor deviations. Voting for a Democrat, questioning a sermon, having doubts about doctrine, getting divorced, struggling with addiction. Instead of receiving grace and support, they were gossiped about, confronted, and eventually ostracized. They learned that Bible Belt Christian community is conditional, dependent on maintaining appearances and conforming to expectations. The people leaving are trading intense but conditional Bible Belt community for looser but more accepting urban communities. They describe feeling lonely initially but eventually finding deeper connection with people who accept them as they are rather than demanding they perform a role. They'd rather have authentic shallow relationships than inauthentic deep ones. And that preference reveals how hollow much Bible Belt community actually is. Where are Bible Belt Christians going? Let me map the major destinations and what attracts people to each. Nashville has become the South's progressive city for Bible Belt refugees who want to stay Southern. It offers country music culture, warmer climate, and enough conservative presence that you're not completely abandoning your roots. But it's also diverse, politically mixed, and full of churches that range from traditional to progressive. You can be a Bible Belt Christian who evolved without feeling like you've completely left home. Raleigh-Durham attracts educated Bible Belt Christians because of Research Triangle jobs. It's Southern enough to feel familiar but progressive enough politically to escape Bible Belt culture. The church scene includes everything from megachurches to emerging churches to mainline progressive congregations. Atlanta serves a similar function but with more racial diversity and more thoroughly urban culture. It's where Black and white Bible Belt Christians go when they want Southern culture without Southern small-town constraints. Outside the South, Denver is the capital of Bible Belt refugees who love outdoor recreation. Colorado has mountains, skiing, hiking, and libertarian politics that appeal to conservatives uncomfortable with Bible Belt social conservatism. Focus on the family is in Colorado Springs, so there's evangelical infrastructure, but Denver itself is progressive. Austin attracts Bible Belt Christians who want Texas without being capital T Texas. It's the progressive oasis in a conservative state, with tech jobs, live music, and churches that lean left. Portland and Seattle attract the most progressive Bible Belt refugees, people who've moved left politically and theologically and want communities that reflect those values. These cities have Christian communities, but they're much smaller and more marginal than in the South. Phoenix and Boise attract people wanting warmer climate and more conservative politics than coastal cities, but less oppressive culture than the traditional Bible Belt. Each destination offers something different, but all share features that Bible Belt churches lack: diversity, theological openness, political variety, and cultural flexibility. What kind of churches are Bible Belt refugees finding in their new cities? The variety is vast, which is precisely what attracts them. In Nashville or Atlanta, you can find everything from conservative Southern Baptist churches to progressive mainline congregations to non-denominational emerging churches. Bible Belt refugees often church shop extensively, trying different styles and theologies until finding something that fits. Many are drawn to churches that describe themselves as third way or big tent, places that welcome people across the theological and political spectrum without requiring uniformity. One popular model is the urban multi-site megachurch that's theologically conservative but culturally progressive. These churches preach Reformed theology but welcome Democrats. They hold traditional sexual ethics but show LGBTQ people genuine compassion. They're evangelical without being Republican. Churches like the Village Church in Dallas or Austin Stone in Austin attract Bible Belt refugees who want to keep their theology while discarding Bible Belt culture. Another popular option is Anglican and liturgical churches. Many Bible Belt refugees discover liturgy for the first time and find it refreshing after a lifetime of informal evangelical worship. The Book of Common Prayer provides structure. The church calendar creates rhythm. The ancient prayers feel grounded in history rather than contemporary politics. Progressive churches also attract Bible Belt refugees who've moved left theologically. United Methodist, Presbyterian, and Episcopal churches in cities offer communities where you can be Christian, politically progressive, and theologically open simultaneously. These churches often have substantial populations of former evangelicals processing their faith journeys. Some Bible Belt refugees don't find churches at all. They become spiritual but not religious, maintaining personal faith practices while rejecting organized religion. They've been burned by Bible Belt churches and can't trust institutions again. This group is significant but hard to quantify because they're not showing up in church attendance statistics. Bible Belt refugees aren't just joining existing churches. They're building new expressions of Christianity that reflect their journeys. In cities across America, you'll find churches planted by former Bible Belt Christians trying to create communities that avoid the pitfalls they experienced. These churches emphasize several priorities. First, political diversity. They explicitly welcome people across the political spectrum and refuse to allow partisan politics to divide the body. Pastors avoid political preaching and create space for disagreement. Second, theological openness. They hold core Christian beliefs but make room for different perspectives on secondary issues. Doubts and questions are encouraged rather than suppressed. Third, genuine community. They prioritize authentic relationships over maintaining appearances. Small groups focus on real life, not just Bible study. People are encouraged to bring their whole selves, struggles included. Fourth, social justice integration. They believe the gospel demands attention to racism, poverty, and injustice. They don't separate personal salvation from communal flourishing. Fifth, women in leadership. Many of these churches ordain women or at least give women significant leadership roles, rejecting the rigid complementarianism of Bible Belt churches. Sixth, thoughtful engagement with sexuality. Whether they hold traditional or affirming positions on LGBTQ issues, they approach the topic with compassion and nuance rather than condemnation. Seventh, liturgy and beauty. Many Bible Belt refugees are discovering that informal evangelical worship feels shallow. They're incorporating liturgical elements, written prayers, and aesthetic beauty into worship. These new churches look different from both traditional Bible Belt congregations and from typical urban contemporary churches. They're hybrid expressions trying to keep what was good about Bible Belt faith while jettisoning what was harmful. Whether they succeed long-term remains to be seen, but they represent genuine attempts to build healthier Christian community. While Bible Belt refugees are building new lives in cities, what's happening to the places they left? The traditional Bible Belt is experiencing religious decline and cultural stagnation. Rural churches that once thrived are closing as young people leave and elderly members die. The churches that remain are aging rapidly. Average age in many Bible Belt churches is over 60. Youth groups that once had dozens now have handful. Children's ministries struggle to staff volunteers. The vitality that characterized Bible Belt Christianity is fading. The political captivity that drove young people away has intensified among those who stayed. With moderating voices gone, Bible Belt churches have moved further right, more explicitly partisan, more culture war-focused, less interested in traditional evangelical priorities like evangelism and missions. The exodus has also reduced theological and cultural diversity in Bible Belt churches. Everyone who couldn't conform left. What remains is homogeneous, ideologically rigid, and resistant to change. This homogeneity feels comfortable to remaining members but makes the churches irrelevant to anyone outside the shrinking demographic that shares their exact views. The Bible Belt is also experiencing brain drain. Educated young people leave for opportunities elsewhere and don't return. This leaves communities with aging populations, declining economies, and fewer resources to sustain institutions, including churches. The cultural influence the Bible Belt once had on American Christianity is waning. For decades, Bible Belt Christianity set the tone for evangelicalism nationally. That's ending. Urban Christianity is increasingly influential while rural Bible Belt Christianity is marginal. Some Bible Belt churches are adapting. They're acknowledging problems, becoming less political, and creating space for questions and diversity. These churches often attract young people who might otherwise leave. But there are exceptions. Most Bible Belt churches are doubling down on the same approaches that drove people away, which guarantees continued decline. The Bible Belt exodus is hollowing out the region's religious infrastructure. Within a generation, much of what defined Bible Belt Christianity will be gone, replaced by a smaller, older, more rigid remnant serving a shrinking demographic. 5 million Christians. They grew up in the Bible Belt, in small towns and rural churches, in a culture where faith and community were inseparable. Then they left. They moved to Nashville, to Denver, to Portland, to Austin. They traded the familiar for the uncertain, the tight-knit for the diverse, the politically homogeneous for the ideologically mixed. They didn't leave Christianity. They left a version of Christianity that felt more about politics, culture, and performance than about Jesus. The Bible Belt exodus is reshaping American Christianity geographically and culturally. The traditional center of evangelical power is hollowing out. The future of evangelical faith is urban, diverse, and less culturally Southern. What Bible Belt refugees are building in their new cities might be healthier, more sustainable, and more faithful than what they left behind. Or it might lose something essential that Bible Belt Christianity preserved. Time will tell. But what's certain is that the Great Migration is happening. Bible Belt Christianity as we've known it for 2 centuries is ending. What's emerging is still taking shape. Here's what strikes me about this story. The people leaving aren't rebels or backsliders. They're often the most thoughtful, engaged Christians from their home churches. They love Jesus. They want to live faithfully. But they couldn't stay in environments that equated faith with partisan politics, that rejected questions, that treated people cruelly, and that refused to address injustice. They left because staying would have required abandoning their consciences or their faith. That should be a wake-up call for Bible Belt churches. When your most committed young people are leaving en masse, something is profoundly wrong. You can blame culture, politics, or Satan, or you can look honestly at what you've become and ask if Jesus would recognize it. The Bible Belt exodus is a vote of no confidence in Bible Belt Christianity from the people who know it best. Those who were raised in it, who loved it, who wanted it to be what it claimed, but who ultimately couldn't stay because the cost was too high. If this investigation opened your eyes, challenged your assumptions, or helped you understand this migration, subscribe now. Share this with someone processing whether to stay or go. The exodus is happening. The question is whether Bible Belt Christianity will learn from it or continue declining until there's nothing left but buildings and memories.